All right, Phil, you don't know the top 5 topic I'm about to say. Today's actually comes from a question in our comments. I'd love to see a top 5 amendments to your past poker strategies.
Yeah, because there are actually a lot of ways that my strategy has shifted over the years, specifically because of solvers. I started playing poker 15 years ago, when there were no such thing as poker solvers. As they've come out, they've taught us some things about the way poker works that we didn't really understand. So let's see, reaching back. Okay, so number 5, continuation betting flop too often. And this applies to Hold'em, to PLO. It applies to single raise pots, to 3-bet pots. I remember when it was just like raise and then c-bet 90% of the time in Hold'em, or even in PLO, like 3-bet and then c-bet every time on the flop, which was terrible PLO strategy. I actually learned to not do that before solvers came out, but solvers further solidified the fact that you're not supposed to do that. There are some boards on which you can c-bet your full range, and there are several on which you definitely should not. Oh, number 4, 3-betting too polarized a range. So there were spots where, this is way back, facing an open and Hold'em, I would, let's say, 3-bet, queens, kings, aces, whatever, 3-bet strong hands, and then my bluffs I would pull from like 8-5 suited, 10-4 suited, but then there were hands in between the two that I didn't play, let's say 10-7 suited or Jack-8 suited, depending on the spot. Ace-4 suited, I would just call, for example. Whereas since I've learned that you want to first figure out, okay, are these hands good enough to play? And then from the hands that are good enough to play, decide which to 3-bet. And in a lot of spots, you might, a lot of times you want to have a linear 3-betting or 4-betting strategy where it's just the best chunk of hands, but a variety of different types of cards for board coverage, or different like hand compositions for board coverage. Sometimes the 3-betting range is more polarized. Those situations occur when you have with a calling range, basically. So there are some spots where people play 3-bet or fold, and there's no point in 3-betting 8-deuce suited when you're folding 8-5 suited. Like you just pick the better the hands that you're going to play, and then 3-bet all of them, and you just pick from the best one. So that's a linear 3-betting range. But then there are some spots where, let's say you're defending the big blind against a middle position open. Well, now you have a lot of hands that you call with, and then your 3-bet actually can be more polarized. It depends on the spot and the stacks and blah, blah, blah. But there are a lot of situations where you do not want a polarized 3-bet range. I'm actually going to roll this into number 3. I used to love to raise with hands that were not good enough to call. And there are some spots where that's okay. But for the most part, what we've learned from solvers is if it wasn't good enough to call, it's pretty unlikely that it's good enough to raise. That's more of a PLO thing than a no limit thing, I think. But I think it holds true in a lot of scenarios, at least. And I used to always take the approach of, all right, so my value raises, I know what those are. My bluffs, I'm going to pull from hands that are going to have to fold otherwise, but I can raise with them instead. So I don't do that as often anymore. Number 2 is using a lot more small bet sizes. The funny thing is, when you go back to like 15 years ago, and especially learning tournament strategy, you would just like raise and then you c-bet tiny, and then you bet turn pretty small. Like you actually would do a lot of small betting. And then for a while that got uncool, and you would do a lot more checking and then big betting with hands that want to bet. What we learned is basically you can't generalize. There are some boards on which you want to just small bet a ton of hands. There are other boards on which you only want to big bet. There's some boards on which you want to big bet a ton of hands based on range composition. But basically, small bets are a very, very important part of optimal poker strategy, especially from out of position. So basically, I think 10 years ago, small bets out of position were almost exclusively, they were to do one of two things. One, it was to just put a small amount in the pot so your opponent doesn't bet bigger, and you want to stop your opponent from raising, or you want to induce your opponent to raise so you can then 3-bet because you have a huge hand. And now we've learned that, there's a much more blended, nuanced strategy that just involves a lot of small betting because, let's say, for example, you're leveraging a certain part of your range that you have an advantage in, and once you bet big, the kind of gap or deficiencies in your opponent's range don't matter anymore because they have the hands to defend against big because they don't have to defend as many. But if you defend small, or if you bet small, they have to defend so many hands that they get into some really uncomfortable spots based on the makeup of their range. And also, it's just like, you want to, if you want to get value across two streets for small sizing, you have certain hands that can do that. But once they start betting big, they're no longer good enough to value bet. Anyways, there are a lot of spots like that where it comes up. So number two, small betting. Number one is an interesting one because so number one is game flow, the concept of game flow. Game flow means, you could call it kind of metagame, but it's not overall metagame. It's in the moment game flow, what's been happening. Game flow is essentially, I haven't turned c-bet in a long time, so I think my opponent's going to believe me if I c-bet flop and turn. Game flow is still a thing, but over the years, I've come to learn, well, first of all, against players who are studying theory, it's much less of a thing. They're not too concerned with game flow. And second of all, as I play against players who are just focused purely on playing theoretically optimally, you notice a lot of things that feel like game flow and feel like people are adjusting in certain ways when actually it's just the run of cards that they're getting or the run of cards on the board. So I think interpreting game flow and utilizing it to my advantage is something that I've stopped doing much. There are still times where, a player's losing and they've just called like a big river bet. They've just called a big river check raise and they've been wrong both times. And you can tell they're really frustrated and they feel stupid doing so. I think they're going to be unlikely to put themselves in a tough spot or unlikely to call a big river bet again, depending on the player, but because they don't want to feel stupid again. Similarly, if they just got caught with like a big bluff, they don't want to go for a big bluff again, feel stupid again, don't want to risk feeling stupid again, because then the check raise becomes about more than just risking the money. It's also risking the emotional pain that comes along with it. An interesting thing that I'm reminded of, and if you've watched all of my videos, I've probably told this story before, that combines game flow and raising hands that can't call, was the most memorable hand I've played. I was playing heads up for a bracelet. It was $25K World Series Poker 6-max tournament. And I hadn't raised a flop in a really long time. And I just decided to raise complete airball on flop. And I'm going to make up the board to get roughly the idea. King, Jack, 4. And I check raised like 8-5 offsuit because of game flow, which is something I wouldn't do anymore. But I hadn't raised in a while. I thought he'd be very believable. And so I raised. Turn was a 10. So completed a bunch of draws. And because every like flop draw got there, I was like, he's going to believe me and just fold a bunch of stuff. So I bet turn something like half pot. And I have about a pot size bet left on the river, which I have him barely covered, I think. Or maybe he has me barely covered. Anyways, the stacks were close. And he actually min raises the turn. And I can't call out of position with 8 high. The only play is go all in or fold. And I really didn't think that he would raise a good hand. I just didn't believe that he would raise a good hand there because it just looks like I'm going to go all in on the river. So why would you prevent me? I'm young at this point. I have an aggressive image. I'm the online guy. And my opponent played online. It was Steve Sung. He played online, but he came from a live background and a strong player. But yeah, I just thought there's no way that if he has a good hand, he's just going to let me keep bluffing. He wants to let me keep bluffing. So why would he raise? I tanked with 8 high, no draw. I've never gone all in on the turn, or flop, gone all in with cards to come with 0 equity when called. I always had a gut shot or something, a flush draw. I'd never done it before. And I just felt too, really believed that it would work, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And actually a little bit of of what I just talked about with game, this wasn't game flow related, but there's a lot of emotional pain that goes along with making a play, a just complete kamikaze bluff like that, and just getting called and feeling really stupid for a really long period of time. So I ended up folding. I couldn't do it. I saw on the stream afterwards, he actually had a weak top pair, and I'm pretty sure it was raise folding because he didn't want to face the river bet, which is what I suspected. If he had a big hand, he wanted to let me bet river. And so that I ended up losing, and that's my only second place in the World Series of Poker. And so that hand was very memorable. It would have been had I shoved, I would have had 80% of the chips in play, and instead I was at a 60-40 or 70-30 chip disadvantage and did not win. So if I could go back and play that now, I guess actually I wouldn't have check raised the flop, but had I check raised the flop and bet the turn, I think I probably would have gone with it. Trusted my read. I guess that wasn't one of the 5 things listed, but we'll make that the bonus number 0, which is that over time, and this just comes with experience and having a relatively successful poker career, I've learned to trust my reads. And I've had enough of those spots where I've done something crazy and been right, and some where I've done something crazy and been wrong. But I've had so many spots I've been right more often than not, so that if I make a guess like that and it doesn't work out, I don't beat myself up over it. I just say, well, usually when I have a feeling that strong, I'm right. This time I wasn't. I can move on. That's our top 5 plus walk down memory lane. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.